Hi, and welcome back to another episode of Run Till You're Done. Today, our guest has just completed a winter Bob Graham round. And if you don't know what that is, well, you'll just have to wait and find out. And he not only completed the round, he set the new record of 14 hours, 57 minutes, and 45 seconds, which that's pretty fast if you don't know. Um, of course it is, it's the record. So without further ado, we'll hand over to Nikki.
Thanks, Gavin, for coming on. So, just
Thank
we always start on this podcast, we ask every guest, how did you get into running?
So it was about when I first got into it. Really, it was I guess about 6 years ago now. So I was living in Bristol, and actually the first run I kind of properly did was I'd actually seen a friend of mine had he'd just done a 10k run. And I think he posted it on Facebook or something, and he said, "Oh, this is my 10k PB today." And I kind of looked at it and I was like, "Oh, I bet I could run a 10k a bit faster than that." So I just went out and ran a 10k. And I can't remember what time it was. It was, reasonably average, but I sort of did it and I quite enjoyed it. I was like, okay, I can actually, I can run. And then, yeah, just sort of went from there really. And something just kind of clicked for me and I signed up to a half marathon pretty quickly. And then from there, it's just been a gradual escalation. So I very much started in sort of city running and road running. And gradually as time went on, I've moved. I can count on one hand now the number of flat runs I do. It's all hills basically.
And which half marathon was it that you'd signed up to?
So it was in Bristol, the Bristol half. But I actually, so my first race was the Bristol half, and it's the first and so far it's the only time I've had a DNF. I basically, I think the week before in training, I got shin splints. And at the time I was very sort of new to it all, pretty a little bit sort of overly sure of myself, should we say. Thought I'd be fine on the day, so I set off, having a great time, feeling brilliant. And I got about halfway through the course and this pain in my shin got worse and worse. And I think about, you're in the Bristol half marathon, you run about 5 miles out of the city, you turn around, you come back in, and then you just do the final few miles through the city itself. I got to the turnaround point, so about as far away as you possibly can, realized that I wasn't going to be able to finish and I couldn't really keep running. But because of where we were and all the roads were closed, I then had to walk back in to town on this leg, and ended up kind of turning it into a stress fracture. And then it was sort of a case of 6 weeks or so of being on crutches and off running. So it was quite a dramatic start for racing. But I think in some ways it did me good because I sort of did that, and it just made me think, okay, well, I've got this pretty wrong, but I'd like to go back and actually have another go, get it right. So I went back the following year and did the half again, had a much better result. And then from there, it just sort of snowballed, really.
And it snowballed into the ultra running over what period of time?
Slowly, I focused on, I spent a couple of years just doing the half marathon distance. And I got really into that for a while, sort of trying to knock your PB down and down. And I sort of got to a point where I had, I got just under 1 hour 15 for my half marathon time. But then I became more and more aware that I was basically at that point, the courses I was picking, I'd be scouring country for courses that were the flattest, fastest courses. And I think it came to a bit of a head. I did one in London. I think it was in Victoria Park. And you do 3 laps of this park and it's a bit miserable. It's a bit boring. I spent half of the time looking at my watch, sort of the exact, because at that point you're looking at the exact lap splits for every mile. So you're sort of thinking, oh, I'm 2 seconds off my target split for this lap. And yeah, and something in me was just a bit like, this isn't enjoyable anymore, and the kind of the scrimping and saving you have to do at that point just to even take another 10-15 seconds off a PB, it stopped being fun. And it tied in with, I was actually at the time planning a move out to New Zealand on a working holiday visa. So it sort of all just came at the right time. Of I was sort of just starting to go away from the half marathon. I'd done a road marathon as well, and I'd quite enjoyed the longer distance and having that bit more time and pacing. And then going out to New Zealand, I was like, oh well, I'll try trail running out there and see what that's like. And I think from there, just for me, that was just it. Once I started that, it's because there's a different level of joy to it. When you're out there and it's a way of exploring. It's a way of covering a lot of ground. You can eat a lot more. You can go out. When you're half marathon training, you don't take a sandwich with you or pizza or whatever. You can't kind of sit down halfway round and stop and eat and take in the views. So yeah, it was just sort of then a natural progression, and I fell in love with it.
I noticed from your DUV out in New Zealand, well, you did the Kepler, which I know somebody else who went out to New Zealand, started running, and that was one of the races that she did. But the other thing I noticed was she did a backyard ultra, and that's what I've been sort of focused on. I think I've done 10 now, so that's my
wow.
thing nowadays. How did you find that?
I really enjoyed it. I did it because it was a bit of a last minute thing actually. I was signed up for another race out there, the Old Ghost, and they had to cancel because of COVID at the time. It was when New Zealand got sort of another wave of COVID and put more restrictions in. So Old Ghost was a much bigger event that couldn't go ahead, and then there was this much smaller backyard ultra that was like, well, we can still go ahead because we're not going to sort of hit the level of entrance and things that would stop us. So I just pivoted onto that, and I really enjoyed it. I had a great time, and a friend came down with me. So we were both living in vans, so we took a couple of vans down with us, and sort of set up. It was this big field, and it was like just this really fun experience. Of everybody who pulled out would then sort of stay in and camp out and support as well. It was my first time of racing anything sort of through the night and going without sleep and things. So I enjoyed it for that experience as well. And I think I got to 26 hours and then I got IT band problems, which I was suffering with a little bit at the time. So I kind of knew it just got to a point where I couldn't keep going for that really. But it was, it was a really, really great experience. And I love the format, I think, for practicing. If you want to practice nutrition or your kit or going without sleep, there are so many good things you can do. I mean, the top level of it now is slightly terrifying of, what the absolute top guys, because I was actually Sam Harvey was at that as well, who obviously I think he's still number 2, isn't he, in the world now?
So he knows what he's doing.
He does. Yeah.
So you say for the backyard, for the nutrition, we've got quite a lot of backyard fans on this podcast. What did you take for nutrition in between laps?
So I think with that, I mean, back then I'd eat a bit of everything, to be honest. And I think we actually, and I mean, there are people who'd be able to speak far better on sort of proper nutrition for backyards than me. But I remember we tried to make it quite fun. So, we actually scheduled in, like, I think at 6 a.m, we did breakfast, me and the guy crewing for me. We actually had like, eggs and bacon and things, I think. And, we had like sat together and had like a nice little breakfast. And it meant for me, it was like a psychological thing of having something to look forward to, so when you're at 4 a.m. or something, like, right, I'll do 2 more laps, then I get a nice breakfast. I'll have some orange juice or something as well, So it was something just to break up the monotony, because I think especially if you're going to go a long time and over 24 hours, there is that real thing of taste fatigue. You need to have a bit of variety in there.
So would you do another one?
I've thought about this a lot, and I don't know. I think at the moment, like, the more running I've done, the more I've gone to hills, really, and stuff that's challenging terrain and technical. And I think, that it's the flat running that scares me these days.
There are hilly ones out there. I think there's one in Sweden that's got it's a ridiculous amount. It's like 600 feet of ascent per loop.
Well, that
one
would
in
be
Scotland.
that would be my kind of one. So if I was going to
Yeah.
do one, it would be something like that. Yeah.
I've done one in Wales that's right on the coast, and it's not exactly flat. And there's one in Scotland called the Highlander. One's to look into.
Okay.
You said you were practicing your kits during the backyard. I noticed you wearing a La Sportiva top there.
Oh yes, I know. It's subtle, isn't it?
Are they sponsors?
Yeah. So I've been with them just over a year now. But yeah, really lucky there. I mean, it's a fab team. I sort of met them at when I was at Ring of Steel. What was that, about 15 months or so ago? And just chatted with them. But there's quite a big team here in the Lakes already. So obviously they've got Sabrina, there's Kim, and then the main office sort of in the UK is over at T-Bay, so it's not far away. And it's all run by James Elson, so it's a great team. And they, you know, I looked at when I was, kind of in the Lakes and looking at different shoes and things. Like the Lakes are quite a tricky area to find the right shoes for. It rains all the time. You've got everything from, we get grass, we get mud, we get rock. There's all kind of trail here. You need, and it is quite tricky to find the right, particularly if you're sticking to one brand of shoes. It is tricky to find one that covers all of that. And for me, yeah, these guys they're perfect.
Have you got a particular model of shoe that's your favorite one?
I've got a couple. Just depends on what I'm doing, really. So, like for the Bob Graham, for example, I was in the Cyclones, just because they've got like a nice technical fit to them. They've got a deep lug on as well. So particularly in winter, they're kind of like my go-to. Anything kind of reasonably long distance over winter. And then the Mutants are just a brilliant, like, kind of day-to-day, training and racing shoe. So those two, I think, just they kind of stand up to anything you can throw at them, really.
So moving on to the current topic at the moment, which you have just achieved, as Mike has mentioned in the introduction, your Winter Bob Graham round. Well done on that. Before we get on to more detail about that, what attracted you to the Bob Graham?
So it's something I heard about years ago. Sort of actually on a podcast, it was back when I was in New Zealand, and listening to podcasts about British ultras and things, and I sort of heard about this Bob Graham, and something about it, instantly I kind of it caught my attention a little bit, and I liked that there were these certain rules around it. It was something a bit different. So you have, for it to be an official attempt, then it has to be that you've had someone with you the entire time. It doesn't have to be the same person, but you need to always have somebody with you. And they sort of say that's partly as a safety precaution, because you're up and you're spending your whole time up on some quite high peaks. It's also kind of, there's a navigation element to that of making sure that you actually get to the right peaks and that you have summited everything, and there's no sort of shortcuts taken or anything like that. But then there is also, once you start to look into it a little bit more and you start doing your research, like there's a deeper element to that, I think, which is about encouraging, and I've said this a lot, but it's about encouraging community, really. I think that's what, for me, it's what makes the Bob Graham so special. Is there is this community around it of both locals and then people who will put years of work into going and recceing for it and training and getting ready for it, and there is this amazing kind of group of people all around it that will go and support people. I know people who have supported 40, 50, 60 Bob Grahams, and they do that because they love it and because they want to see other people succeed at it. And to give them that chance. So I think there's just nothing else quite like it out there, I think.
And you say you've got the rules, but what actually is a Bob Graham? So
the basic concept, and it was first done, I want to say it's 1932. It's definitely in the 30s anyway. And the basic concept was a guy called Bob Graham, and he wanted to see if he could do a loop, and it was doing 42 peaks, or 42 of the Wainwrights, in the Lake District in a single loop. The main challenge of it is, that you have to do it in under 24 hours. And that's sort of the main target that's set for everybody. So yeah, it's 66 miles. It's roughly 28,000 feet of elevation within that. And you start at the Moot Hall in Keswick, and you go from there. You do this big loop all the way through the fells, and you cover a little bit of almost every area of the lakes within that. Whole range of ground, 42 peaks, and then you have to come back onto the steps of Moot Hall at the finish.
I was trying to explain this to my daughter the other day when I told her that you were coming on the pod, and she's always curious about who's done what. And I was saying, the Bob Graham round, and she says, oh, because this man's done this, does this mean he gets the round named after him? I says, unfortunately, no. It did work like that, but no, it's all Bob Graham is the first person that done it, so it's his round.
It is, yes, it is his. And there's a lot more there are more rounds after that, named after other people as well. But I'm happy to do other people's. I don't need one named after me just yet.
Have you done a Ramsay or a Paddy Buckley yet?
I haven't. No. On the cards, definitely. It's on the list. It's just a long list, unfortunately.
And with the Bob Graham as well, it says you hold the winter record. What are the rules for winter? When does winter start and end in Bob Graham terms?
So yeah, and it's interesting. And again, with winter, you start to get into the lines start to blur a little bit. I mean, so technically, the definition is from December the 1st through until, and I think it's the end of March. I want to say it's either end of February or end of March. That's the kind of the main winter period. There is then within that, you have a midwinter period, which is sort of the week or so around the shortest day of the year. So that's your proper hardcore winter bob. There's also then, in the last few years, there's been a bit more of a trend towards doing a solo unsupported winter bob, which it was done years and years back. It sort of was done, and then I think it was Martin Stone was the first one to do it. And then it sort of went dormant for a while, and then recently that's become a bit more popular again as a very different. I think that's a very different kind of challenge. So you have supported and unsupported. You have winter, you have midwinter. Obviously, conditions in winter as well can vary hugely. So there's a huge amount of scope for what a winter round could actually look like.
What was the
Sorry,
what was the weather like for your winter round?
It was varied. I'd sort of spent a lot of time looking at the weather, and so we ended up changing our schedule. I think it was about 5 or 6 times in the end, and I felt awful because I had this big group chat going, about 20 odd people, and it was mostly just me being really neurotic and saying, we'll go here, no, actually, sorry, we're going to go here, who can do this day? And yeah, we'd originally planned to go on Sunday the 1st. That was sort of a goal, just so as soon as we hit the winter window, go in, get it done. We were then the weather really turned for that weekend, and it was sort of heavy rain and wind all day on the Sunday. And I'd kind of made it clear to everybody, like, I don't mind running in some bad weather. Like that's part of what you do, and often that is part of a Bob Graham. But also the idea was, with a fast round, being the aim, we needed to have conditions that would be suitable for that. So we went from Sunday, then we went to Tuesday morning, and then the weather was going to turn on Tuesday, so we had to move it back. So we ended up with a Monday 9 p.m. start, and the idea for that was to give us the best weather window that we could, looking at the forecasts. The kind of caveat to that was that it meant several more hours of running in the dark than I'd originally planned for. So a 4 a.m. start was my kind of ideal plan, because it gave us time in the daylight on some of the most technical ground, sort of through Langdale. When we moved it back, we got a better weather window, or so we thought, but it meant more. We'd do about 10 hours or just over 10 hour stint running in the dark. And after all that, we got 4 hours of snow in the night anyway. So all my plans were undone.
One of our previous guests is Wendy Wilson, who's big on social media, a weatherman as well as a runner. He's an amateur weatherman. He knows how to interpret the data, and he's usually more right than a lot of the big corporations that put a lot of money into it. What were you using for your weather predictions?
So I had about 5 tabs open of Met Office at any one time, so I could kind of see every area, because I was looking at sort of visibility, wind speed and direction, chance of precipitation, and obviously when you're looking at it over what was hopefully going to be a 15-hour time, we had the wind was changing in that time, the visibility was changing. So I did a lot on that, but then I also spoke directly with MWIS, some Mountain Weather Information Service, and they were really helpful. They sent me sort of quite a detailed email of everything that their charts were saying and all the conditions. And obviously they know, if you say to them, look, I'm planning a Bob Graham, they know exactly what you're talking about. They know which areas. So they were really helpful. It just, in the end, it turned out, and we'd kind of scheduled it because it looked like there was a new front meant to come in at about midday Tuesday, which is when we finished. But typically then the weather actually stayed clear for another few hours after that. But I think something like that, and I've thought on it a lot since, and and people have said to me, oh, do you think if conditions had been better that you could have gone faster? But I think in my mind it was a winter Bob Graham, and part of that is we were overall lucky. We did have about 4 hours of snow, and we had some tricky conditions because of that, but that's kind of what we signed up for as well. In doing a winter Bob Graham, part of the challenge of it is the weather. So I don't regret it at all. I've actually made it, enhanced it in some ways.
Yeah, it's almost like an achievement, because it is a winter Bob Graham. You want winter conditions. So there are people, the internet being the internet, there are people out there that says that, oh, it's not you didn't get the conditions, then it's not a ground, but you did. So
and it was, it was quite funny because there were times, I think, on all of the, particularly the first 3 legs of it, there would be points where we'd kind of look at each other and just be like, you can't argue that this is winter, like when you're sort of trudging over snow or you've got the wind howling and you can't really see what you're doing, like it is winter. So yeah.
It's like this year Spain. Look at Jack Scott when he smashed the record. I think that was the best weather that winter Spain has probably ever had. And you could argue, well, that's why, but that is what it is. It's the same week every year. If you get the weather, you get it then, and it's just your luck of the draw, isn't it?
It is. I think to me, it's part of the fun of winter ultras, and that is quite because a lot of, most of Europe, they don't really, it doesn't happen in the same way because, they've got so much snow there that you can't get up in the mountains. And so I really like that there's this sort of British, tradition now. There's quite a lot of winter ultras that happen, and you just don't know, you do not know until the day what you're going to get. And I think that's part of the excitement of them, is you could get, I've done Arc of Attrition for 2 years and had pretty generous conditions. I've been running in a t-shirt for those races and I've had sun and it's been pretty pleasant. But every time I've done it, a part of me has thought, if you did this in bad weather, this would be completely different as a race. This would be unrecognizable in how you need to approach it and the style of racing, and that I think is part of the excitement. I like that thing that we embrace, that winter's unpredictable and you need to be ready for anything.
Summer in Scotland is unpredictable. You can get all weathers in one day. So
yeah. I mean, the lakes is the same. Yeah, we get used to rain pretty much every day.
And in preparation for the winter, Bob, have you done the round before in summer conditions, or like wrecked parts of the route? How did you prepare that way for it?
Yeah, so I did it. I moved to the lakes when I came back from New Zealand. I moved to the Lake Districts about 2.5 years ago, and I came in kind of. I wanted to do a Bob basically, and I kind of came here, and that was my intention quite quickly. So I did one within 2 months of moving here, which in some ways was a bit too soon. But I loved it. I had a really good time on it. And I kind of came away from it having had this amazing experience, really happy with what I'd done. But then there was always sort of in the back of my mind a bit of this like, okay, well, that was good, but I definitely could be better than that, you know. And the more time I spent here, the more I learned, you know. So when I came to doing this winter one, it was a real joy to be recceing it again, because I could remember doing my first Bob Graham, and everything felt quite unfamiliar. I didn't know the paths that well. Some of the summits, it was only, you know, the second time I'd been up them or something. I didn't have the same sort of that feeling of connection to it all. And then when I came back to this, you know, I'm lucky in that I live in Ambleside, so I can get to pretty much every section of the Bob Graham very easily and do recce's. So I got out on pretty much all of it this time around, and I'd go and run at the, you know, I had my kind of target splits, and I'd go and run the legs at that pace just to figure out how it felt. But it was just great. Like, you know, obviously course specific training is really beneficial and some of the best thing you can do, but just kind of going back on those fells and feeling so much more comfortable and confident and at home in it was just, yeah, a real joy.
And the current summer record is how do you pronounce his name? It's Jack Kensel. In, was it 12 hours 23? Yeah. How does that compare to your summer round, or how does your summer round compare to your winter round?
So my summer round's actually slower. My summer round is 16:37. But like I say, I've learned an awful lot since then. I couldn't really descend fells at that point. I had a pair of trail shoes on, which just were not designed for running that. Yeah, I mean, so I was actually fortunate enough that, so the week before I did my Bob Graham, I paced part of Jack's record attempt, or not attempt, sorry, he actually got it. I hope he's not listening. Yeah,
we hope he is listening.
Well, yeah, that's true. Sorry, Jack. No, I ran legs 4 and 5 with him, and that was amazing. You know, it was, for me, it was what I'd moved to the legs for, was to be a part of things like that. And it was just inspiring to see. You know, I've never seen someone so focused and driven and determined as that, you know, and it was amazing to be a part of it. You know, he was like, because I was quite focused in mine, but he was sort of, you know, he'd just be driving up these hills, and you'd be right behind him carrying all his kit, and he'd suddenly just kind of go, water. And he wouldn't look, he wouldn't stop. He'd just put a hand out behind him, and you had to get that water to him and then be ready. The moment you didn't want it, you had to take it straight back. But it was, yeah, just brilliant. And I think one of the best examples for me of, you know, when you try and explain what that idea of community in a Bob Graham and support is, I paced legs 4 and 5 with him. And it was brilliant, and, you know, just a really special day. And then I got my Bob Graham planned for just over a week after that. So I'd been, you know, part of this big WhatsApp group chat, and I still needed a couple of paces. So I kind of put in this WhatsApp, you know, if anyone fancies another one, I'm going next week, and still need a couple of people. And a couple of hours later, I get a message from Jack just being like, yeah, I'm there. And I can, you know, and I kind of said to her, I was like, I wasn't really meaning you. Like, I think you've done enough. But he came, and he ran all of leg 2 with me, and he, you know, and he just threw himself into it. He brought Oreos. He was kind of, you know, chatting away about how good the splits were and what we were doing, and, you know, and he just enjoyed it, and he loved it, and it was so, you know, it made it special for me as well, having him along. But yeah, I think that kind of, to me, that summarizes what that sense of community in the Bob Graham is. It's about yourself, but it's about supporting everyone else as well.
And did he have your water ready for you?
Oh, he did. He was an excellent pack horse, I have to say.
Right. I basically, all my questions, dumped them onto a bit of paper. So I'm going to ask them quick fire. Nikki, feel free to jump in with any questions that you've got. And Gavin, one-word answers is fine, or if you want to take as long as you need to for each of these questions.
Okay.
So, right. Do you cross-train?
No, I'm just a rubbish cyclist.
Do you use GPS?
Yes.
Did you use GPS for your round? You said you recce'd it, but did you need the GPS for navigation?
A little bit. Leg 2, I used it just because we had pretty poor visibility. But then I turned it off halfway through leg 3. Although that's more credit to the guys I was with on the Pacers, because they were so on it. And I was reasonably confident. I did know the route at that point. But I just didn't want the distraction of it. So I trusted in the Pacers and kind of my own knowledge of it at that point.
What do you do when you're not running?
I run a cafe in Ambleside, so I run around serving coffees instead.
Do you want to mention it so people can come in and get served by a champion?
Absolutely. Well, Four's Cafe in Ambleside, and obviously I'm biased, but it is the best coffee. And we have an amazing terrace with just the best views you can imagine of looking out on all the fells. So if you want to come to town and actually remember what the lakes are all about, you come up there and you can stand and look at it all, and it's wonderful.
I think my first visit will be down there, because believe it or not, I've never been to the Lake District.
Definitely. We'll come up. Yeah, we'll get your coffee.
I've been down. I can't say whether I have been in that cafe or not. So sorry.
That's right.
I may have been. I don't know. Right. Have you got any intentions of doing any other rounds?
Yes, several. It's what I love about the lakes. And obviously, we've touched a little bit on, there's the Ramsey and the Paddy as well, both of which, I would really love to get to at some point. Being based in the lakes, it's much easier for me to kind of look at the ones here and recce those. Yeah, I love all of them. There's, you've got the Steve Power round, which is sort of the next step up in terms of distance. You're doing about 110 miles and covering all the peaks over 2,000 feet. You've got obviously Andy Berry's really fantastic record of the Lakeland 24 hours, which I ran a section of that with him when he did that. Yeah, there's just so much. And then you have sort of, and I'm hesitant to broach it at the moment, but like you do have that at the top end. The crowning thing is the Wainwrights round, doing all 214 Wainwrights, which is just one of the most exciting things there is, I
think. Bob Graham is split into 5 legs. Which is your favourite and why?
So leg 4 for me. It has all the things I enjoy most, which is it's got some big climbs. So you've got straight out of Wasdale, you've got this big climb up Yew Barrow, and then you kind of carry on climbing up to Red Pike. So you've got some, and again the climbs up Gable and up Kirkfell, all kind of big, quite tough climbs that just really suit me. And then, but you've got these gorgeous stretches of runnable trail as well, around sort of Pillar and Kirkfell, those areas. You get these long stretches of just kind of single track traverses around the sides of some of the hills, and it's that time where if you know to expect it and you've kind of kept a bit of strength in your legs, you can just fly through those sections, and it's the best feeling.
Or there's points in it, although you have to visit every peak top, not sure what Wainwright, there's different ways up to them. Was there any points that you thought that you didn't choose the right way?
I don't think so. No, I mean, I'd done a fair bit of work on the navigation, and everyone I was with knew it as well. So yeah, there's a few route choices along the way. A lot of the time, it comes down to what suits you as a runner. So are you better over something that's maybe slightly longer but less technical, or do you just want to take a direct line? Sometimes it depends what the fog's like. I think the only route choice that let us down on the day was coming off Blencathra, which is the end of leg 1. And the guy who was pacing me for that, Rich Keefe, he had this, he'd got this really nice line, and he'd gone and looked at it quite a lot, where so there's a few options for coming off Blencathra, but the main one that people use is Hallsfell Ridge. And the top end of that it can be quite technical and quite tricky. So we've got this really nice line that was sort of a scree shoot just to the side of it. You kind of charge down this scree, you take a quick contour line around the side, and then you basically come back onto the ridge once the kind of most technical section has stopped, and you hit it at quite a runnable section. So we'd done this, and he'd been wrecking it and told me, oh yeah, it's going to take us 17 minutes or something. It was about 5 minutes faster than I'd scheduled for. So I was like, oh, this is perfect. And then on the day we hit it, and what would have been this really lovely scree run was frozen solid. So it's essentially like a 45-degree ice rink. And it's the kind of thing, once you've started on it, you cannot stop, you cannot go back. So I had a brief moment where I just kind of suddenly realized I was lying on my front, just kind of sliding down this scree. You're like, well, I'm just kind of committed now. I've just got to keep sliding until I stop, I guess.
Did you have ice axes or anything with you for self-arrest?
No, because it was, to be honest, that was probably the worst conditions we hit that would have merited anything like that. We never hit any portions of proper ice or anything. We'd got this kind of coating of snow, a bit of frost, but it wasn't proper ice conditions. It was just there where you get the rock kind of binds together. So it doesn't have a layer of ice or anything over it. It's just the rock. And in some places that was really helpful and a really nice terrain to run on. It's just not on a steep scree shoot.
Yeah. Look, usually people choose clockwise. But some people choose anti-clockwise. Why would you? Which one did you choose, and why? What's the difference?
Yeah, so I went clockwise, which is the preferred. I think some people, I have paced somebody on an anti-clockwise, and some people do prefer to do that, just because you get the road section. It's quite a long road section, about 4.5 miles or so. Some people prefer to do that on fresh legs. The caveat is that if you do that, you kind of leave yourself some big peaks to cover on what would then be your leg 5. You've got a big climb up Blencathra. Some people prefer that final descent down, because if you hit Skidder as your final summit, you've just got sort of one long descent down into town, and that's sort of it. But I think I knew that run in, that sort of final 4.5 miles on the road, I knew from my first bob that I could do that well, and I could kind of save my legs to have the strength for that. So yeah, I was always happy with the clockwise.
Yeah, is it? On you go, Nikki.
The question I have about that though is there a record individually for each route, clockwise and anti-clockwise? Because surely they, as you say there, they are slightly different.
They are slightly different, yeah. I think, to be honest, it's because it's such a majority of people that have done it clockwise. It's very rare that you get very few people will go anti-clockwise.
Right.
So I don't think, to my knowledge, I don't think they keep any sort of separate records for an anti-clockwise attempt.
Right.
Looking at the Bob Graham website, where they keep all the records, all of them are listed. They say whether it was clockwise or anti-clockwise, but there's no distinction between this is the record for anti-clockwise. It's just you're on the list.
Yeah.
How did you stay awake?
So it's.
Or first question, what time did you start at?
We started at 9 o'clock, so we were running. We ran through the night. So 9 o'clock with then a midday finish the next day. I guess I've done quite a few races now. That's sort of running through the night. To be honest, one night is your adrenaline's firing so much, and because you've tapered, you've got that energy. You don't really feel it. A few well-timed bits of caffeine. If you have that, then I think that's enough. If you can just spot the moments where maybe your energy's flagging a little bit, or you're just feeling that bit of pull of tiredness, get some caffeine in at that point, and you'll be fine. Did
you take any breaks, toilet breaks, sleep breaks, or anything?
Not really. I mean, the odd kind of quick wee on the hill, and then very much the idea at the so you have these crossover points on the road between each leg, and that's where you have two paces running with you. You drop them off at the next road point, and you pick up your next two paces, who then carry on with you. So we'd stop very briefly at those, but it was literally about a minute each time. It would be just in, check the new paces. They would have then a bag of kit, of the next sort of bag of nutrition and everything. So I'd basically kind of change my head torch out to a fresh one to make sure we didn't have any battery issues. Maybe have a swig of, I had a bit of tea with me and stuff, and just some extra fluid and things. So I'd get some squash or some carb mix or something in at the 8 point, and then I'd be off again.
Did you have a favourite top? And by top, I mean Wainwright, not running top.
The last Motiva accelerator 2. Guaranteed comfort. No, I think I mean, what I love is that they're all different and they're all distinctive. For me, I think Blencathra will always be one of the most special ones for me, because it's just one I've come close a few times to driving off the road, because I'll just, every time I'm driving near it, I'll just be kind of there at the window staring up at it. It's got the ridges that run off it are just gorgeous. They're so distinctive, each one, and you've got all these. I kind of have memories of racing up and down those ridges on local fell races and running along the top of there, and yeah, it just will always be really special to me.
You get that like driving through Glencoe as well. I've nearly went off that
yeah.
things because you're like that. Oh, wow,
it's amazing. Yeah, driving through there is just gorgeous.
Do you prefer summer or winter, having done both?
I don't know. I like them both for they're so different. I mean, the summer you will get, a summer round is going to be faster, and you can definitely push yourself. I think I definitely find it a bit harder running through the dark. That is tricky, and it does just make it a bit harder. You can't, you're more focused in just the immediate what's in front of you. But it made a lot of the going over the rocky stuff that was so much harder in winter. Stuff that in summer, if it's dry, you can just be jumping from rock to rock, and you can make some really swift progress. We were having to kind of almost crawl our way over, because it was just so tricky underfoot, and then your feet were just sliding out from under you. But I love both they offer such a different experience. Politician's answer, sorry.
You just said that the summer was faster. Would you go back and improve?
Maybe one day. It doesn't hold any immediate appeal to me, just because I'm so happy with what I've done with the Bob Graham right now, and it feels like a really nice place to be at with that right now. And there's so many other things to look at, that never say never.
Before you did your winter round, were you public with your time aspirations? Did you tell
I was
anybody?
in the end. Yeah, I think I got to a point where I told a lot of friends, and then I told kind of friends of friends, and it was sort of, and then I told people I was going on the Sunday. And so when I moved, then a lot of people were kind of texting me on the Sunday saying sort of good luck, and I was like, I haven't gone yet, and so in the end I did put something on Instagram of just saying I'm doing this and I'm going for the fastest time, and I was very honest. I said, like, it might happen, it might not, and if it doesn't, I'm also okay with that, which I meant. I sort of, that's the fun of going for something. You go for something, and it's fun if you don't know if you can do it or not. Why do something if it's a guarantee? But I think it was good for me, because it then just kind of settled me of like, well, I've committed now. I've told everyone I'm doing this, because a few people were like, oh, that's a bit bold, isn't it? Putting that out there. Because obviously you look like an idiot if you then, if I'd gone and run like a sort of 17-hour winter bob or something, everyone would be like, oh, who's this guy pretending he could beat the record? But it was a nice thing for me of like, I've committed now, and whatever happens, I'm going to give it a go, and we'll see what happens.
How did you prepare for winter conditions?
Again, just training, really. training in the conditions. So I've raced, don't get me wrong, I didn't kind of go out running through the night or anything in preparation for this. I just trusted I've raced in the dark before. I've done a fair few ultras now where you've raced through the night. So I was confident in that respect, that I knew what to do. And the wind, I mean, again, I kind of train in the lakes every day anyway. So I'm used to most conditions at this point. I've run in snow, in ice, in rain, in cloud, in all of it. So you just, I think the more you train in that day to day, it starts to feel less like you need to do anything specific and more like you just kind of used to it.
Was your kit any different than your summer kit?
Just bigger, really. So more spares of everything. I think I didn't, I actually, in terms of what I was wearing, I was reasonably light in, pair of shorts, and then I just had, I think, sort of base, a base layer of t-shirt, a mid layer, and a waterproof on for the majority of it, and then a pair of gloves, and I was pretty comfortable in that. But then the main difference was kind of foisting onto my paces, a load of spare kit, basically. So that I think the biggest thing, and particularly in a winter round, some of those peaks that you're on, when you're on them in the night, in the dark, and it's cold temperatures, if anything was to happen, you just, you want to kind of be responsible for your own safety at that time. So we carried, spare layers, basic first aid. We had a thermal bag with us. The idea being that just if something happened, if one of you turned an ankle or fell and hit your head or something, you have at least got enough kit to keep that person warm, long enough for mountain rescue to get out of you. And I think you do just need to have that bit of kind of personal responsibility when you're doing something of this scale.
And races like UTMB, London Marathon, huge city marathons versus a solo bob, which the only people you see are your crew. How do you find that?
I think they're just very, very different experiences. I mean, for me, it was my crew and my paces that made this special for me, because a lot of them were good friends of mine, and people I know and that I've run with a lot in the lakes. So it becomes this really kind of intimate shared experience, and it just felt really special all the time I shared. And each leg was different. We were with different people. We had a different experience. And all of those felt really, really meaningful and something I'll kind of remember for a long, long time. I'm a big fan of the big events as well, but I think for me personally, I prefer something a bit smaller. I know for a fact now that if I went and did something like UTMB or even London Marathon, I would find it a bit almost too much, just in terms of the amount of people and the volume and the noise. I've gotten far too used to just running in the fells with, almost you see the odd person and who you say good morning to or something, and that for me is kind of where my heart is.
And last question, this is a listener question. I think they're taking the mick, but did you wear carbon shoes?
Vapor flies the whole way.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's all about grip on the fells. So you don't talk about carbon plates, you talk about lug depth. Is the big thing there. But if somebody can do a Bob Graham in carbon shoes, I will take my hat off to them.
Well, Nike has brought out ultra flies, have they not? Have they not got carbon in them?
I haven't seen them. I would imagine, because there is, there is sort of a growing market now of kind of carbon plated trail shoes. They are still very much on the trail end of that, so they'd be good on your kind of hard packed gravel and your runnable trail, but they won't hold up to the kind of the descents you're doing, because a lot of the Bob Graham, you're often running not on a path or anything, you're running on basically a grass trod, and the moment that's wet, there is no grip to it unless you've got deep lugs. no, and I didn't do because obviously Jack Kensel did use Vaporflies, to be fair, on his road section at the end. So there is a place for them even on the Bob, but I didn't. I was in a pair of the kind of the springier, to be fair, quite springy La Sportiva shoes, the Prodigios, which they have a bit of kind of energy rebound in them, but they're still not carbon plated.
Yeah. I did say to the person that asked that question, I think, is it Robinson, the last one where before you go onto the road, that would be the only place that you could wear carbon shoes and it would make any difference, because everywhere else is off road and it'd be silly.
Yeah.
You're saying about Jack.
It'd be quite interesting to watch somebody try, I think. But yeah.
You're saying about Jack changing the shoes for the road section. You were saying about throwing water at him. I can imagine him saying, "Change my shoes."
Oh, it was all there'd been this really big discussion about it beforehand of how efficient it was going to be, and everyone got quite excited because he was going to come in and they were going to cut through the laces. They had scissors at the ready. So they were just going to cut through the laces of his old shoes, tear them off, and he'd just step into these Vaporflies and be off again. And everyone's like, it's going to be like an F1 style pit change. It's going to be so smooth. And instead, we sort of got there, and I didn't see it because I was changing my own shoes at the time as well into a pair of road shoes. I was sort of stood to one side doing my own shoes, and I was ready in the exact same time as Jack, because I think there was a lot of faff over who had the scissors and they couldn't quite cut through the laces. Yeah, didn't quite materialize.
When you have been doing your events in the past, do you have a favourite one for whatever reason, whether it was performance or just sheer enjoyment of the race?
Maybe, but I think for me the exciting thing about racing has just been variety, and I consciously try and keep the races I do really varied. So I've done, I do everything from sort of a Bob Graham, or I've done 100-milers, but I fell race all the time as well, and sort of that'll be sometimes 2 or 3 mile races, and they are savage, they are really, really intense, and it's basically like 30-40 minutes of just this pure adrenaline, and your heart rate's at the absolute max, and you're against a whole group of guys that and there's something really fun, and I love the contrast, so I enjoy those for just this kind of 30 minutes of terror basically. And then other events I've done, like Arc of Attrition, will always kind of hold a special place for me, because it was my first sort of big win in the UK, and sort of at the 100-mile distance. So and that was a really special event. But they've all got something special, I think. Lakeland 100 again this year was such a fun event, and doing it kind of again on home trails in an area I knew so well. But yeah, I just enjoy trying to find new races all the time, and things that excite me and make me want to do better.
For the Bob, you obviously had, well, you say you had chat groups with 20 people in it, because you have to have somebody there the whole time. You obviously had drivers and stuff like that. Other events, how did your crew compare to other events that you've done? Do you want to shout anybody in particular, or don't shout them because you might forget somebody?
I know, that's the thing, isn't it? You kind of you credit 2 people and then 5 other people say, "Oh, you didn't mention me." No, I mean, I think the Bob was a mate because it is sort of off your own back, So other races, I've had crew on some, and I've had some really good crew, but you know that in a race format, you've still got that support of the overall organisation. There are going to be aid points, there will be marshals out there, there is more support, and with the Bob it's kind of all on you really, of how much you do. I mean, I was really, really lucky, and with the people I had Andy and Lisa, the road crew, were just superb, and because it is a tough job of 15 hours essentially of just driving back and forth across the lakes. Because of the pace of it, the timings are actually start to get quite tight for the distances you've got to be covering, and making sure the paces are in the right place at the right time. but on everybody I had, and I am doing at some point, I'm kind of doing a little write up of the whole thing, just to actually to give that time to credit everybody, because everybody contributed something unique to it, and they were all really special. And I think one of my favorite parts of it that I think is, again, kind of sums up the community around here, is about 5 or 6 of the guys who ran with me were kind of local runners who either run for Ambleside or nearby clubs, and they ran. So a lot of these people ran with me sort of through Monday night or Tuesday morning, and a lot of it giving up sleep and a huge amount of time for it. There was then a local not a fell race, but a local kind of clubs race in Ambleside on the Tuesday night, and it's you run up a road called the Struggle, which is about, I think it's 2.5 miles up to the top or so, and it's this long steep climb up. It's a handicap race, and about 5 or 6 of them turned up to that race on the Tuesday night, and these people who have run maybe sort of 4 or 5 hours with me that morning, or through the night, and it was just brilliant. And I live just up the road from where it starts, so I kind of hobbled down to go and see them all, and they're all there, it's looking fresh as anything, excited to go again. They've all got the club vests on, and they're saying, "Oh, you're coming up as well, aren't you?" And it's just there's just this joy to it, of everybody. They just love it, and you can never get enough of it.
And that's what it's all about, the community, isn't it? Just everyone getting together and pulling in.
It is, yeah, and it is just that we all just love being in it. We love being in the fells, and we love getting out there, and it doesn't matter necessarily what the weather's like, or but when you get to share that with other people, then I think it's just at its absolute best.
You mentioned with your events how you like the fast-paced 30-40 minute events to the Bob Graham and the Arc. How would you fuel for all those different events?
So yeah, and it is really different approaches, to be honest. I mean, I like the short stuff. For me, I find it really good training. It's sort of it's just, for me, it's the way of getting the absolute best high intensity training I can, that I then try and use as a training benefit into longer stuff. So some of your short stuff, you're not even fueling, the pace is just too hectic, really. There isn't time, or it might just be a quick bar or something is on the go if you're racing a little bit longer. As you then move up, and it's something I've done, kind of had worked on quite a lot this year, is my fueling once you get particularly sort of 50k upwards, really. And it's been, for me, so I ran Arc at the start of this year, and I had 50 miles of feeling amazing and like I was in complete control, and then I had 50 miles of not being able to eat and throwing up and generally feeling pretty sorry for myself, and it was a real kind of lesson for me, and I had to kind of go back and almost restart my nutrition, and then so since then I've just sort of, particularly with longer stuff, it's just a question of practice. Use what you're going to train with, what you're going to race with. I try to aim for 90 grams an hour. I haven't quite got to that yet, but I've gotten a lot closer, and just then consistency. And I think on ultras in particular, like I remember by the end of Lakeland 100, I could almost like hear my voice would just be in my head, would kind of be saying like, just chew, swallow. And it, because you're bored at that point, and a huge part of your brain doesn't want to eat anymore. But the wheels will come off so quickly if you don't, that you just have to make it a mechanical process and keep going.
And what can you stomach? Because fueling is something I really struggle with. So I've actually got a list of everything everybody's trying, and I'm just going to try and see what works for me, because it's individual. So what do you like to eat?
Yeah, and you're right that it is massively individual, and that's it. You have to really experiment. I mean, I think for me, and it makes me a bit sad in a way, I when I started ultras, I was everything. I was pizza, I was sandwiches, I was rice pudding, just anything I could get my hands on, I'd eat it all. And I found now with just, I think partly just with trying to run at higher intensity and then to push myself and to be more efficient with how the carbs go in, like it has become a bit more sort of one line for me. So I tend to have a mix now of, so I'm sponsored by Boom, who are wonderful, and they do a lot of really good products. So I have their bars, which in terms of gram for gram, they are some of the best sort of carb dense foods you can get out there. And their caffeine stuff as well is just like, it's pretty caffeine heavy. So it just like, it wires me straight away. I don't even have to have much of it. So I use that, and then the kind of the carb mix of theirs as well, the Fusion Fuel, and there's all sorts of versions of that out there. But I like that because you're hydrating and you're carb loading at the same time. So you kind of two birds, one stone with that. I do find it's variety though. So I know that early on in a race, I can get quite a bit of carb mix and quite a few bars in me, at quite a consistent rate. As time goes on, I switch over to gels, and I go with just Morton gels, because those, if you mix them with a bit of water, they basically just dissolve in your mouth, and it almost doesn't feel like you're eating anything. It does mean you end up carrying a sickening number of gels with you at some point in a race. And I know some people who race almost exclusively off them, which I don't think I could quite bring myself to do. But yeah, that for me now, it's sort of those three things basically, and I just try and vary the quantities through the race. So I start heavier on one thing and I move across to something else as my stomach starts to get a bit more stressed.
There's various things out there like bicarbonate soda for, is it lactic acid, and pickle juice for cramp, I think. Is there anything that you found, yes, this works, or no, stay away from that? Or have you just stayed away from everything?
I've not really delved into those things, but I've not had much problem with sort of cramping and stuff. It's not something I've ever really suffered from. A lot of people swear by boiled potatoes, and salted potatoes and things is great, again, for you getting that salt in. And also, and beetroot's another one. And I have experimented with that in the past, some beetroot bars and things, which can be, again, pretty good. And I think when
as long as you remember when you go to the toilet the next day that you had the beetroot.
Yes, I've been there, had the panic on those. I think it can be really beneficial to have something savory available. I think particularly on longer stuff, I do find there's a point for me where I'm just really over sweet stuff, and a huge amount of the market out there is sweet, because it's the easiest way to get carb dense foods in. But I think having something in there that can just be a bit of a relief from that is a huge boost.
So far with your running, because I have a feeling there's so much more to come from you in the future, up to now, what would you say is your biggest running achievement?
It's hard because there are things that I've done, fell races I've done here, that in the grand scheme of of the world of running, they're quite small achievements, but they're things I've taken a real pride in. Sort of Dunnerdale, which is a local fell race, and if you didn't live here, you would never have heard of it. But I won that a year back, in 2023, and that was my first kind of proper fell race win, and that was something really special to me. Sort of making that feeling of, you get this, it's only a 10k race and you get this trophy that's about this big, it's a massive beast of a thing, and it's got, they all with the trophies for things like that, it's an annual one, so you get it for a year, your name gets engraved on it, and then you give it back. And something really special about those ones, I think, where you become a little piece of that kind of local history and having your name on it. So yeah, that was one for me. I mean, Arc of Attrition, again, like I mentioned earlier, that was as a race, that was sort of my first big achievement and my big win. So that was always quite a special moment as well. And then the Winter Bob is again, something I'm really proud of and I'm really excited by. But it's hopefully there's plenty more to come.
And now time for a really deep question. What is your why? Why do you run?
I think what I said to you earlier about how when I went into trail running, something just sort of clicked for me, and I love training, I love competing, I love being competitive, but for me, I do think first and foremost it's about exploring, and I will always get a real buzz out of going somewhere I haven't been before and going for a run in that place, and just seeing somewhere new. I think it is the best way, particularly if you're going somewhere new and it's got mountains or the coast or there's lakes or anything. Going out for a run in that it's the most amazing way of sort of connecting with a new place and exploring somewhere. And I think that feeling when you're just, when everything kind of clicks and you're on a really runnable trail and you're just enjoying it and taking in everything around you, that's, I try never to lose sight of that. That's why I do it, really.
You spoke about aspirations for doing future rounds and things like that. Is there anything else event-wise that is on your bucket list?
Plenty, yeah. I mean, the list is huge. So I've got sort of races for next year. I'm doing Trans Gran Canaria in February, the 84K, and then a couple of the GB qualifiers for the trail races next year. So Scafell Sky Race and 14 Peaks Ultra. So there's some fun stuff there, but I mean, the list for me is endless. I really want to look at the coast to coast record at some point, because I've run several sections of that route before, and it's something I really want to get out and do. Dragon's Back one day I think would be fun, like that multi-day stage racing, and there's some really interesting strategy and techniques you can go into with things like that. Just everything I can get my hands on, really.
Is the coast to coast one? Well, there are several. Is that the Wainwrights coast to coast, or is that?
Yes. Yeah, the Wainwrights one. So it's Damien Hall has it at the moment. But yeah, it'd be fun to give it a go at some point.
Right, you said that during Lakeland 100 you were telling yourself chew. You had to eat at certain times.
Yeah, that makes me sound like a train, but yeah.
Well, if you got that's a rhythm when you've done 100 miles, then you're doing all right. What do you think about when you're running?
I think part of what I enjoy is that you don't think a lot of the time. There's particularly it never ceases to surprise me when you do a 20-hour race or something, how quickly 5 hours goes by, and a lot of the time there isn't a lot going through my head, because you just in that moment, all you really think about is you think about your pacing through to the next checkpoint or what you're going to eat next, or I'll often have just like one line of a song just running endlessly through my head, and I'll kind of be then like, why is that song in there? I have no idea where that's come from. But that's part of the draw of it, I think, is it's that complete, nothing else matters in that moment when you're out there and you're running. It's it's just about that moment.
And potentially another deep question: who would you like to run with, whether they are alive or not?
Yeah, good question. I'm glad you sent me that one in advance, actually. I didn't have to think about that. I think, and I did think, did I have any sort of, historical figures that I've wanted to go for a run with or anything? But I think actually, for me, it would be going back to, I mentioned about the Wainwrights round, which is, I think it's one of the crowning achievements in the Lake District. It's covering all 214 Wainwrights in a single venture. The record is currently held by John Kelly. Of 5 days and 12 hours, previously held by Sabrina. It's a stunning achievement, and I'm basically sort of whoever next attempts that, I want to be there for that, and I will make sure I am there for that, to be honest. But that for me, something like that, being a part of that, I think it's it's wonderful, you know.
And you've mentioned a couple of races that you've got coming up next year. Is there anything else on top of what you've already got booked, or even further into the future? What running dreams or anything like that?
I think, yeah, it depends on, you know, so for next year, it's sort of, I've got the first half of the year booked. It'll then depend on how those races go and what comes. I'm trying to keep it varied. I'm doing some slightly kind of shorter, sharper stuff next year, just because I like the variety, and I don't really want to kind of commit to a single distance at the moment. I think long term, you know, I will eventually move into longer stuff. I've kind of stuck at 100 miles for now, because I feel like I've kind of learned a lot about that distance and how to pace it, and I feel quite happy now with what my strategy is. As time goes on, I will move into longer stuff, you know, and sort of push that distance up and go. I mean, yeah, I'd love to look at something like Tour One Day, Tour de Gent, or something like that. I think getting into some big mountainous stuff. Also really excited to see what they do with Ring of Steel and those races, having had a year off. I know they're sort of, it's returning next year, so excited to see, yeah, what routes they come up with and what they're putting out there, because I think I'd love to do a bit more in Scotland and get up into some proper big mountains.
Well,
The Tour's an enormous one. One of a couple of my friends, they've actually just done that this year, and he released a video onto YouTube, and it just looks stunning.
Yeah, and I think the scenery you get out there, and just the altitude is a little intimidating in terms of just needing. It's hard to get that training in the UK, but there are ways around that, and there are things you can do for that. I think that's something that, again, scares me a bit, but it excites me, and that's why I look.
And it looks hard as well. It does not look. I was even more shocked when he told me at the weekend there, "Oh, there's a bigger one again," and I'm, what?
Yeah, that's the thing. You can always go up and up and up, and yeah.
Right. Well, we're on to the section 5, leg 5, and we're onto the road section. So we're going to call it a wrap. You've just put your hands on the Moot Hall door, and we're going to say thank you, Gavin, for joining us tonight. Thank you, Nikki, for being Nikki, and thanks everybody for listening.
Oh, thanks for having me, guys. Yeah.